Welcome to another Museum FAQ video. I'm Paul Orselli, President and Chief Instigator of POW, Paul Orselli Workshop, and I am delighted to be joined today.
Here we go.
To be joined today by Steven Rosen. Hello, Steven. How are you?
I'm fine, Paul. Nice to see you.
Nice to see you too. And I just want to compliment you on the lighting in your background there. Steven, I always like to start out by having people tell us a little bit about their background and how they got to where they are now. So you can start wherever you like and then end up at Available Light. So take it away.
Well, I was born a very small child near my mother. And then a few years went by. I found myself desirous of a career as a professional lighting designer for the stage. And I trained in college for that. I have a Bachelor of Fine Arts from Webster College in St. Louis, and I have a Master of Fine Arts from NYU. Both in stage lighting design. And I love the art of lighting and the art of storytelling and the way you can move people in a theatrical production. And so it was a good fit for me. But along the way, I also had always had an interest in architectural lighting and had an opportunity to do an internship while I was in college for an architectural lighting design firm. And so that was always kind of in the back of my head, a kind of an interesting thing to do. And ultimately, I ended up, after a few years in New York City, chasing that first Broadway show, I ended up in Salem, Massachusetts, working for the company that I had interned for. And being someone with an incredibly short attention span, I found myself doing theatrical lighting at night, working for all the small theaters in the Boston area, and continuing to do architectural lighting / engineering for this company. And opportunities come along, it's the, opportunities is being prepared and for the right opportunity to come along and you find some success. And through a long and circuitous route, I ended up being asked to light my first museum for Krent Paffett Associates, which is now Nick and Ed are both retired, and I continue to do work for Nick. But I did my first museum project, which of course was something that was never on my list of things to do. It never had occurred to me that there were such things as exhibit lighting designers, let alone exhibit museum lighting designers.
What was the first museum?
The first museum was the Hampton Roads and Space Center in Hampton Roads History and NASA Space Center in Hampton Roads, Virginia. So it was actually a pretty big project, just sort of plopped in. But Nick and Ed kind of held my hand and made sure I didn't make any boneheaded mistakes. And it was fantastic. And at the time, this is the late 80s when I did this project. I came to learn that where I live, Boston, Massachusetts, there was quite a hotbed of museum exhibit design firms here in the Boston area at the time. And word got out that there was this guy that did lighting design for museum exhibits, this expert who has done one project.
You had them.
And my phone started to ring. It was, just fortuitous and lucky. And so I started doing that. And eventually I left the firm that I was working for and went out on my own. And that led to an assistant. And I turn around about 30 years later, and I am the president of a company called Available Light. I like to say we work in three verticals. We do, of course, museum exhibit lighting design, which is what we're here to talk about today, but we also do quite a lot of architectural lighting. Everything from hotels to science research labs to restaurants and office interiors. And then the third leg of our stool is lighting for special events and trade shows. We call that our seats division. And regrettably, about 13 months ago, that division kind of fell off a cliff. And just yesterday, we did our first trade show exhibit in Atlanta, which I'm very excited about. I'm
Yeah.
hopeful that that is a harbinger of things to come.
Yeah, for sure. Well,
So we have we have 3 offices: Boston, New York, and Raleigh. Soon to have an office in Phoenix, and I am surrounded and with colleagues with a number of fantastic lighting designers, and here we are.
super. Well, that's interesting. You know, as they say, from little acorns, mighty oaks grow. So that,
Well, I don't know about Mighty Oaks, but
well, hey,
I'm happy to be here.
if you're getting ready to open your 4th branch, I'd say that's pretty mighty. So, well, that's great. So yes, we want to focus primarily on the museum aspect of
Right.
your work. And I guess my sort of way to launch into this conversation is with sort of an impertinent question, which is like, why should I hire a lighting designer anyway? I mean, I hear on projects I work on, you know, I think people ask that question, and I will just state that it is maybe a somewhat common question, but I will also state that it's sort of an ignorant question. And maybe the reason it's ignorant is that people aren't really considering some things because they don't even know to consider some things about lighting and how lighting can really provide a positive impact on a museum goer's experience and the design of museum exhibits and spaces. So I just flung the doors open wide, Steven.
The barn is open.
For a little museum lighting 101, but you know, to really touch on like not only why should people work with lighting designers on projects of all sizes, I think it's fair to say. But you know, what are some things that people might not consider, like they might have missed when they're thinking, when they ask that question? Well, why do I need to work with a lighting designer? We've got track lights here. We'll just point them, and there we are.
Well, you know, what's interesting is I would say 10 to 15 years ago, that question was, you know, at a cocktail party, you know, I'm a lighting designer, right? But within our field, I am happy to tell you, delighted to tell you, that more people understand a little bit about what we do than ever before. I mean, it is rare that an RFP from a client comes out these days for a museum of any kind of scale where it does not mention lighting design. Now, that was anathema years ago. I mean, people just assumed that lighting happened, but they never really talked about it. Somehow it had to get done, so somebody did it. And lighting design has become, I think, far more understood and appreciated than ever. And I'm very excited about that. That said, the question is, why hire a lighting designer? I think the easiest answer is because you don't know what you don't know. And lighting, if done well, can make a project sing and also check off a lot of really important technical boxes that you might not consider. And I've certainly, traveling the world and going to museums, I've seen a lot of examples of people who did bad lighting. And when I say bad lighting, I don't necessarily mean aesthetic or artistic, but taking care of collections, taking care of delicate objects. And I've seen projects that are they're just so beautiful because the light reveals things in ways that someone who didn't really think about light was unable to sculpt with. So the kinds of things that when somebody says, so what are the things I should consider about light? I think it's a good entree to why, you know, what do I do or why do I do it? And so let me just give you a couple of bullet points for you and your audience to think about.
Sure.
The first is, you can be in a room that is filled with light, but feel that you're in the dark. And so one of my favorite phrases is brightness is perceived by vertical surfaces. So what I mean by that is if you have a room and there's lots of lights in it and all the lights are in the ceiling and they're pointed down, and there's all kinds of, if I took out a meter and I read the light level in the room, I go, wow, there's a lot of light in here. But when I look up, if there's no light on the walls, I don't perceive brightness. I don't know there's light there. And so a danger that people can run into when they're lighting a space, especially a museum gallery, is they focus the lights in such a way that you're completely unaware of the space that you're in. Now, if you're doing a gallery that is in outer space or underwater, that might be a good thing. You might want to create some mystery. You might want your visitors to not necessarily understand where the walls and the ceiling meet and where the floor is. You really want them to feel like they're in an immersive space. But most of the time, I would say that is untrue. That when you put people in a dark space with a few spotlights in it, they feel uncomfortable, claustrophobic, it's disoriented. And so understanding how to make a space feel, I wouldn't necessarily say cheerful, but feel comfortable, you need to understand that light has to be on some vertical surfaces. That's number one. I think another big thing another phrase I like to use a lot, especially when I talk to the lighting designers that I work with, is to think in section. Now, for those of you who don't understand that statement, when you're looking at a ground plan, you are looking down at a space and you see where the exhibits are, you see where the walls are. And a lot of people start a lighting design working in plan. They start drawing circles on paper to represent lights. And what they don't realize is how quickly they're going to get themselves into trouble. Lighting is all about geometry. It's all about the angle of light and how it's going to strike an object. And there are a number of reasons why you'd be concerned about that, not the least of which is being able to see the object. So you want the light oftentimes to come from the front so you can see the object. But it's also, if you're lighting a painting that has a piece of glass in front of it, if you put the light too far away, when you look into the glass of the painting, you don't see the painting. What you see is the reflection of the light, or what we call glare. And so thinking in section means thinking about where the lights are in space as they relate to what it is you're lighting. So what the angle of light is. So kind of a side view as opposed to a plan view. If you start in side view and you think about the geometry, then you get to the plan view where you start putting the circles on paper, you will find that you're going to have far greater success.
I mean, this is interesting. I think this highlights the sort of intersection. I know we're trying to minimize.
I don't know how long I can take this, Paul.
We're trying to minimize the lighting puns, but some just slip out. The intersection between the sort of technical and aesthetic aspects of lighting design. I mean, everything that you just mentioned in terms of the geometry and thinking in section, you know, you are striving for a beautiful space, an appropriately lit space, but there is a lot of technology and sort of technical aspects behind it, not least of which the lights you're using, of course.
Right. So it's interesting, when you interview lighting designers about why they became lighting designers, you will often hear a lighting designer say, I love that lighting design is a right brain, left brain activity, because it truly is. If you don't understand the technical part of lighting, you'll never be good at the creative part, because there are rules to understand. You can't break a rule unless you understand it. And if you break the rule without understanding it, there are consequences to be paid. And the thing that's magical about light is just the way it reacts to things. And if you're lighting silk, sheer silk, it's very different than you're lighting a brick wall. If you're lighting an object that is horizontal or close to horizontal, it's very different than lighting something that's vertical. And so materials, reflectances, colors, adjacencies, scale, all of these things come into trying to sculpt a space to be interesting to visitors and to help them. I often use the word hierarchy, help them understand when they walk into a space, what are the primary, secondary, tertiary things that I'm supposed to look at? And lighting can suggest that in very subliminal ways.
I'm just, not to break the flow here, but it just brings up a question in my mind. I mean, considering the wide range of projects that you've worked on just within the museum, I'm just naturally curious, like, what's the most challenging project to light that you've done to date?
Wow, the most challenging project. Well, I guess the first thing that popped into my brain was the U-505 submarine at the Museum of Science and Industry.
Sure.
It was I think a 285-foot long artifact. And so having to think about that and how to reveal that thing and make it interesting, and also just the technical challenge of lighting something that large, was a bit mind-blowing when we started on the project. And how we, but like any complicated project, what's the first thing you do? You break it down into bite-sized bits. And so that's exactly what we did. And so when you light a space, any space, you always think about layers of light, right? You're not going to use one light source to light something. You're going to use a bunch of different light sources to help tell the story. And that's, the way we approached the U-505 was very much like that. It was a great challenge and a lot of fun, and it came out pretty spectacularly.
There you go. Next time people are in Chicago and they're at
That's
the
right.
Science Institute, it's like, wait, I remember I saw that video with Steven about the U-505. So that's great.
Without being a spoiler, because I don't want to be a spoiler, one of the most amazing moments you will have in a museum exhibit experience is when you ultimately see the boat. I will just leave it at that.
Okay, there we are. Now we're giving people an added incentive if they've never been. So cool. So what are some of, when you're advising people, you've crossed that threshold, they realize they need to work with a lighting designer, they want to work with a lighting designer. What are some of the things that you like to get your clients sort of thinking about or helping them think about so that they can really maximize the value of what light can do for a project?
Oh, that's a great question. So I think the first thing that we try to understand is, what is the style? Like, what is the overarching vision that our client is typically the exhibit designer who then works for the owner. But we're trying, even though we work for the exhibit designer, of course, we want to be in the room with the owner too, because we want to hear the words that they use to describe their own project. So first is understanding style. Is it theatrical and immersive? Is it more didactic where, there's not a lot of time, people don't have a lot of time. You think about visitor centers for like the National Park Service, say at Yosemite or any number of places where you want to get thousands of people are going to go through that visitor center in a day. And what you don't want to do is create too compelling an experience, right? You don't want people to stay in the visitor center. You want them to go to Liberty Island, go to the Liberty Science Museum, or go to the Liberty Museum and get out and go, and then get back on the boat. You go to the statue, get on the boat, go home. So there's a lot of things about motivation that the client has that will help inform how we're going to start working on a project. Another thing that we're very interested in is the integration of daylight into a space. Does the client have this idea for a black box, or do they have this idea of a bright, airy space? Is the style, what is the environmental design or the interior design? Is it a mansion in Rhode Island on the Rocky Coast? or is it a space exhibit about the space shuttle in Washington, D.C.? So style and scale become are the departure point for us to figure out how we're going to approach something.
So I'm just I'm just wondering, there are so many different aspects, and you've highlighted just a few here. If you were trying to create a space from the ground up, now I'm giving Stephen the Emperor King here, the King of Light. What, like, how would you create a space that really was a flexible space, a space that really lent itself to the ideal lighting opportunities for a space? Like, if you, like, literally somebody came to you and said, I know we usually start with the architects or the exhibit designer. I want to start with the lighting designer this time, because
well, that would be a mistake. But okay, I'll walk down this road with you
why would it be a mistake? Why? I mean,
well, I guess it really comes down to there's two kinds of people in this world, right? There's two kinds of exhibit spaces in this world, to be as broad as I could be. One would be a permanent exhibit space.
Right.
We are going to dig a hole in the ground. We're going to drop the U-505 submarine in it. We're going to build a roof over it. And that submarine's going to be there a while.
Right.
Right. So that's what I would call a permanent exhibit. And then there is a changing gallery where the question you asked me would be more about that second space.
Sure.
What would I think about when wanting to create a flexible space? Because I don't know there's going to be, over 50 years, there's going to be 100 different kinds of exhibits in there.
Fair enough.
I love the question. So if I can qualify it a little bit.
Thank you for reframing that question in a little bit more intelligent manner. So yeah, let's talk about a non-permanent space, something that inherently needs to be and wants to be flexible. So now I give you back your king powers.
Okay. So the first thing, and I already mentioned this, I would definitely want to have a space where daylight can enter the space, for sure.
Why?
Because there are experiences that you will want to create in there where it wants to feel open, it wants to feel connected to the outside world. The subject matter may demand that. And I would want light to be able to enter that room from a couple of different angles. I'd want it to be able to come in from overhead, and I would want it to be able to come in from the vertical surfaces, from windows or some other kind of openings in the walls. But that said, I would want to be able to push a button and magically that daylight goes away, right? Because if you're going to put in 1,000-year-old Bibles in that space for a temporary exhibit, you don't want daylight in that space because that's bad for the artifact itself.
Yes, sure.
So I want to be able to close off the clear story, but maybe leave the windows open. Or I want to be able to close the windows, but leave the clear story. Or I want to make it completely dark. So that's number one, is okay. How can I bring daylight in? And then at the push of a button, how can I make the daylight go away? The next thing I would do is I would consider a lighting system and a technology system, meaning delivering of media and interactivity and all of those other complex parts of a museum exhibit. How can I deliver those services to the gallery in a sophisticated and clean way? So I would want to have ways in the system, whether I'm hanging my lights from track or from pipe, some sort of a flexible system so I can move lights around. I would want in the same place to be able to deliver digital signals, whether it be for lighting control or to deliver media or music or security. So I'd want to create a very open technology system that combines lighting with technology so that there's a lot of flexibility. I would want the wall finishes to be probably of some sort of a medium finish. They're probably not, some spaces you might paint the room every time you change the exhibit. Other spaces, maybe they're high-end finishes where you don't want to change the walls. So I would not pick white and I would not pick black, but I'd pick somewhere in between so that the reflectances of the space itself hopefully would never compete with the things that people came to see in that room. So those are the kind of the first things that come to mind.
I like the way you reframed my question. So that it was a better question. That's great. But also I think what you just said is really helpful when people are, because oftentimes people are thinking about flexibility and sort of future proofing
Right.
their spaces. So that's good. Well, I'm wondering, for people who, in addition to contacting Available Light in one of their offices around the country, stay tuned, Phoenix. The are there references that people might become more educated about these topics? Books or websites or things that you think would help people become more aware of some of these issues?
There are enormous numbers of references, and there are lots of YouTube videos about light and lighting design and kind of lighting 101 sorts of things. Those are fantastic references just to understand, to really force yourself to see how light works and how it can be successfully manipulated. There's lots of examples of that.
Awesome.
But there's also a publication that I would really draw this audience's direction to, and it's there's an organization called the Illuminating Engineering Society, or the IES, and they are made up of a bunch of committees who study different topics, and I am on a committee called the creatively named Museum and Gallery Lighting Committee.
Hey, I wonder what they do.
And we produce a recommended practice, RP, that is focused on, of all things, museum and gallery lighting. And it has about 14 chapters, or something like 14 chapters, and it will walk you through step by step all of the things that you should be considering when doing your lighting design. It is the technical aspects of lighting, and it is also the creative and aesthetic applications of light.
Awesome.
And so I would love for everyone who's interested in lighting in museums to have a copy of this recommended practice.
Well, since this conversation will end up on YouTube, as they say, we will put links and information in the description below. And I'm sure it would be great to highlight not only Available Light, maybe some particular projects.
Sure.
Would be good, but other references, even if you had a particular video series or things that you might recommend, we'll put them all below.
Okay.
So
great.
We'll look at them below. So I'm wondering if there's anything in our closing minutes here that we haven't covered, or really you haven't covered, that you think might be something you don't want to leave this conversation lacking. So any sort of final thoughts or things that we might have missed that you'd like people to consider when they're thinking about lighting design and who they might work with in terms of their museum lighting issues?
Well, I guess I have a couple of thoughts. The first would be, if you think lighting is going to be a critical part of the experience, okay, that's only 100% of the time. But if you think so, clearly there's projects that for any number of reasons are not going to be able to engage the services of a professional lighting designer. But I would say to all of you out there in TV land, YouTube land, that if you're not thinking about the lighting design from your earliest consideration of the design of a space, you're making a mistake. Don't say, oh, we'll deal with the lighting later. You should be thinking about it from the very beginning.
That's I would say that's good general advice for any specialty. If you
Yes.
the label.
Well, we're talking about lighting.
You leave the technology to the end.
Right.
You're going to have somebody who's not really doing their optimum work for you or your project. So.
Right. So, and it is amazing that when you do that, the way lighting will integrate itself into the building, into the exhibits, into the fabric of the experience. Well, it makes a huge difference. I guess that's number one. Number two, it takes a lot of lights to tell a story. And you know, sometimes people walk into one of our spaces where the electricians have put the system in, all the track lights or the spotlights are there, and our clients look up and go, "Oh my God, there's so many lights. What's gonna?" I took half of them down because it felt like there were too many. And then we say, "Well, you put them back up. Let's start with put them back up and wait until you see what happens when we start to focus all of those lights, because every one of those paintbrushes has a reason for being." Some of them are wide for washing and doing color washes. Some of them are very narrow for pulling out the button on a Civil War uniform. You know, when you break things into layers, that's where you create interest. So don't be afraid to use a lot of equipment, because it will serve the project well. And then one other thing I would also, but as I say that out of one side of my mouth, I'll say out of the other side of my mouth, don't forget that there are rules about taking care of these artifacts that we've been entrusted to for future generations. It's incredibly important to think about that from the beginning. And it always breaks my heart when I walk into a museum and I see artifacts treated badly, both from a lighting point of view, but also from a humidity and temperature point of view.
Conservation.
Conservation is really important.
Degrading.
But I've also seen a lot of really beautiful, celebrated objects badly lit in the name of conservation. And that too is unacceptable. You should be able to light an object to be beautiful and revealing, and be able to take care of the rules of conservation as well. And that's the word contrast. All you have to do is think about contrasts. How dark is the background versus how bright is the object. And an object that cannot have a lot of light on it can still look very bright if it's surrounded by a bit of darkness. So,
well, that's where that theater background comes.
That's right.
Into play too. So, well, Steven, I would be remiss if I didn't comment on what a pleasure it was to speak with such a bright person.
Yes, brilliant. We're brilliant, really.
Brilliant. We got those last few puns in there, but no, it was great to speak with you. And as I mentioned, we'll include some references and links below. But I'm sure after this video comes out, the phones will be ringing off the hook.
Yes, I'm sure they will.
Available light. No, that's great. It's a pleasure to speak with you as always, and I appreciate you taking the time today.
Well, it's my pleasure, and I just love that you do this, Paul, that you seek out people who are passionate about what they do and explain what they do from all aspects of the museum experience. So thank you for doing this.
Cool. All right. Take care.
Cheers.